Hello, on this video I want to show you what I regard as the best upright action ever made. I'm sure a lot of technicians will agree. This is a Bluthner 1923. Bluthner's made the same action certainly from 1908 because we have another one in stock of that age. 85 keys, by the way, not 88. And we're going to see why this action is so excellent and how it compares with the modern action. Now here's some typical modern action. This is on a 4-ick piano, one of the very, very best pianos, new pianos that you can get, we believe, and the price range it's at is a wonderful instrument. And this is held on by stays here, the bolt. We've taken the bolts off, and we can pull, with some effort, pull it forwards, and it will rest forwards. We'll show you in a minute what that's resting on. And if we look at the action, we want to work on anything. We want to work on the damper spring. It's difficult to get to. We get used to it as technicians, and you'll probably tell me you can do it easily because you're used to it. There's the screw for the dampers. The screw for the whipping isn't too bad, but the spoon here, if you want to adjust it, you can get used to bending it like that, and then you've got to bend it back somehow with a damper spoon adjuster. And we'll look at the Bluthner to compare that. Before we do we'll just push this back in. It's difficult to get in and out on a lot of modern actions. We'll look at the Bluthner comparison, but this doesn't fit. You'd have to push it with some force to make sure if you want to try the regulation on the dampers, for instance. We'll have a look down here at the hammer screw, which is the hardest one, and again, as you're a technician, you get used to getting to it, but it's right behind everything, so difficult to get to if you want to work on anything. Now looking at the Bluthner, it just sits like a glove here, and if we pull the action forwards, we can see how the dampers stay on the strings. Let's watch that again. So pull the action forwards, and the dampers stay on the strings, which makes everything accessible, every adjustment accessible. So for instance, if we want to weaken the damper springs or strengthen them, we can very easily do that. We can bend the damper wire, that's no problem either. We can adjust these springs as well, can set the tension on those. We can easily take off the hammers, can easily take off the dampers. Here are the spoons to adjust. Everything becomes very, very accessible. This is held on by bolts to the frame there and at the other end. I'll put the measurements underneath this video if you're a manufacturer and would like to think about this, or if you're action manufacturer or piano manufacturer. We'd really like to encourage you to think about this possibility. Obviously it will take some designing, but I think technicians will be really, really pleased if you can do that. If you're a technician and agree with me, please put your comments at the bottom of this video. So everything's really accessible, and we'll do some adjustments on this in a second. Just resting it back, and you can rely on it damping properly still. It dampens perfectly without the bolts in there. So for instance, adjusting the dampers, they are already regulated well to the pedal, but if you wanted to adjust them to the pedal, you can just bend, and if you slightly want to adjust them slightly, apart from adjusting the pedal itself, of course, and making sure that pulls off at the right time, you can bend these wires, and you can bend them very easily to just easily get them exactly in line. But we're going to look at the dampers to the key, because earlier on I did just regulate a couple of these. So this is B and C, coming off about just after halfway, 2/3 of the way, because the rest of them, this is A for instance, is coming off too late, which if you play staccato hardly comes off at all. There's C pulling off nicely, and A not really pulling off, so that won't do. Maybe it's been set late to make the action lighter, but if you wanted to make things lighter, then you could also adjust the springs, because very often the tension of the spring is too great, so you just push it to make it less tense, and then if you do too much, you can easily bend it again. If you're a technician, you'll know how hard it is to get to the springs in a normal action. So the damper springs on a modern action are hidden right inside here. It's very difficult to, you could obviously, that one's accessible at the end, but what about the other ones? If I try to get inside here, it's almost impossible. And of course you have tools to do that, and it's not very simple. So to get the A coming off a bit earlier, we can adjust the spoon. Now there's the spoon for the A. If I pull it I just have to get used to how, but you have to do the same on a normal action, get used to how much to pull it, and hopefully that's enough. Let's see if that's adjusted it. Let's have a look at it. This is A compared with the B, and it's a bit earlier than the B, so let's just take it back a bit. So this is the one here, so just push it slightly, gently, and again, as I say, you get used to when you've done thousands of these. Hopefully you get used to it. Not always. Every piano is slightly different, but you get used to a piano, and then you can do it much faster later on. And now it's coming off almost exactly the same time as the B. I think that's pretty accurate. So just after hammer travels just past halfway. You set it normally between 1/3 and 2/3. If it's too late, as we say, then it's going to, when you place the carter, not going to come off properly. If it's too early, it might feel too heavy. But we can, as I say, adjust the spring as well. The spring's working fine, so let's adjust that a bit. So this spring on this one is a bit too tense, I think. The manufacturers provide you with certain tension of spring, and you can alter it slightly when you put it on. So let's just detension it a bit by pushing it forward, and feel that still not quite enough. A little bit more, and see how that feels. That's better. That's certainly lighter than the B here, which we haven't done yet. So that makes the touch lighter. So the damper's a bit earlier, but we've weakened the spring a bit, and it's still damping perfectly. And that one is perfect as well. So if we do the others, we probably may weaken them slightly so they don't feel too heavy. So there's plenty of other fine adjustments that you can make. You can access the screws to tighten them up much more easily than you can, and often needs doing when a piano is perhaps dried out slightly. So extremely useful. If you're a technician then, if there's anything else you can see here that you'd like to comment about, if you disagree with me, that would be useful to know. But certainly from my experience, this is much more easy to regulate, and I don't think it should be more expensive to make, though obviously setting an action up in the first place may be expensive, but once people have cottoned onto it, perhaps at the top end pianos to start with will be, I thought all technicians, at least I will certainly be very grateful, and our team will be very grateful if this action was made today. Thank you very much for listening. I meant to say that the modern action doesn't really have a resting point. Of course, you'd normally take it out and put it on the bench, or take it out, put it somewhere. But in this case, it's actually, if you look at this is the half blow rod here, and it does actually rest on that. But of course, we don't want to bend the half blow rod. It's probably going to be safe just resting it there, but it's not really correct. And on the Bluthner action, this is the where the fall is kept in. So if we pull this forward, and it rests on there, which is very well designed. So it just rests on there, just at the right angle for us to work on the action. So now if we look at the action, and it can be pulled out, pushed back in to your heart's content, really, and it will rest perfectly. As a final postscript, my colleague and I were looking at the damping system and realised there's a few things that are different that's important to mention here. First of all, just on finishing off the regulation, it's so useful having these dampers separate. Once we've decided where we want the rod to pick up the dampers, then we can adjust them so that they pull out, clearing the strings, well clearing all the strings, especially these wedge dampers here, and that's really important. So the rod's pulling off when the pedal's about halfway down, because the pedal's at a nice angle then, for the foot, but that's what I decided to do there. Just to say that adjusting the dampers is much easier. Obviously you need two hands for this, but just to show you with the camera, bending it here and then bending it at the top is the normal way of doing things. But fine adjustments can easily be done if it's not going to be bent very far without having to bend it twice. You can get to it so easily, which is really useful. So even when you're setting up obviously initially, if you're an action maker, you would do that, take all the hammers off and everything for normal action, but you can do it, as it were, later on with this style much more easily. Now the other important factor here is that in order to get stability on the rod, because it's not attached to the main action, they've made it metal. And these screws go into the metal rod here. And I've never seen any problems on them, having worked on them before. So I don't think that is a problem really, but it's important to note that the metal, it needs to be a very stable rod, because it's detached from the action. Otherwise it tend to flex in the middle, and over the years it probably wouldn't be, would probably be warping slightly. So the metal rod's kind of important. And the screws, I just want to show you one of these flanges, because they're slightly different. Now first of all, there's a straight bolt screw going into metal here, so there's a metal thread, and as I say, it doesn't seem to create any problems at all. Now if we look at the flange, the hinge, we can see that there's a little, this is where it fits on. I think for location wise, we think that they've made this little step here, as it were. So that step just pushes flush onto the rod, the back of the rod, and that keeps it in place. And you have to actually push it on, otherwise it throws it out of regulation. So I think, just to summarise again, this action is so well designed. As we said earlier, they take the bolts out, and unlike every modern action I know, I think, it doesn't fit like a glove like that. You can actually press the pedal down to lift the dampers out, and it still doesn't move here. So you can regulate, you can be confident that the dampers are going to be coming off. You can you can regulate so that you can see the dampers coming off. You don't have to worry about pushing the action back in and out. And then when you've decided to regulate a damper or one of the springs, you can regulate with your hand. Or maybe you need a tool for the wire here, but apart from that, everything can be done by hand, and just makes life so easy for the technician. So if you're an action designer, just want to repeat, if it's possible at all to make this action, bring it back into production, that would be marvellous for all technicians and clients as well, because technicians are going to be able to work more readily on their pianos, spend less time doing fine adjustments,